Guys, what's going on at middleweight? I have to know everything. I have to know everybody else's business, right?
We'll get our money elsewhere. Those 5 words shattered the UFC's iron grip on its middleweight division, plunging the entire organization into an unprecedented crisis. Fighters who had bled for years in the octagon drew a line nobody expected. It wasn't a protest, not a strike, but a cold administrative notice that sent shockwaves through the sport. The entire middleweight roster, from top contenders to rising prospects, declared they were withdrawing from all upcoming UFC negotiations. They were done waiting, done settling, done fighting for less than their worth. This wasn't just a threat, it was a promise that nobody in combat sports history had ever dared to make, hinting at a secret plan that would redefine fighter power forever. The announcement hit like a thunderclap, leaving Dana White and the UFC scrambling to understand the sheer scale of the coordinated rebellion. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was a perfectly executed, synchronized move that would force the hand of the most dominant promotion in MMA.
But no fight gets announced. Nothing gets signed, and I felt as though this just got brushed.
The message itself was chillingly devoid of emotion. No dramatic rhetoric, no fiery threats, just a short, functional administrative notice delivered privately and leaked instantly across gyms worldwide. It stated a unified intention to withdraw from all upcoming UFC negotiations until financial terms were fundamentally restructured. What emerged from that single defiant sentence, "We'll get our money elsewhere," was the largest coordinated disruption any UFC division had ever attempted. This wasn't just a few disgruntled athletes, it was a unified willingness to walk away from established contracts, promotional calendars, and lucrative title pipelines. The entire structure of the middleweight ecosystem immediately destabilized, forcing every analyst, promoter, matchmaker, and rival fighter to assess whether the division had actually collapsed or if this was a calculated, brilliant negotiating tactic. The sheer scale of the synchronized withdrawal caught everyone off guard, revealing a level of organization previously unseen.
Your social media, we have a much bigger plan to drop this news to get the factor. Fine.
This crisis didn't explode overnight. The triggering sequence had been building silently for months, a slow burn of frustration and simmering discontent. Fighters had increasingly compared their disclosed purses to the skyrocketing financial incentives offered by competitor organizations, particularly those promising international guarantees, equity-based bonuses, or lucrative profit sharing on broadcast deals. Middleweights, historically a high-action, high-profile division, watched in disbelief as a widening gap emerged between their undeniable drawing power and their official compensation. High-level athletes with established name value saw this as a structural disadvantage, a glaring injustice. Even worse, up-and-coming fighters viewed it as a career-long handicap, threatening their future prospects. The perception of being undervalued was a powerful, unifying force, quietly galvanizing a roster fed up with the status quo and ready to demand what they believed was rightfully theirs. This collective realization set the stage for something truly extraordinary.
What did I miss? And of those 3 scenarios, I missed something. Fight's already done. Darren Till's at play.
The announcement was anything but spontaneous. It was the meticulously planned end result of months of covert operations, encrypted group chats, private phone calls, gym-to-gym intermediaries, and carefully separated planning silos designed to avoid detection. The UFC front office first learned of the brewing storm not through a leak, but through an unprecedented pattern of official rejections. Multiple managers submitted identical, algorithmically formatted e-documents declining proposed fights, each containing the same ominous phrase, compensation structure, to be revisited before athlete proceeds. Individually, such rejections weren't unusual, but their synchronized form was a massive red flag. Within hours, managers noticed the pattern. By the end of that day, 7 fighters had declined using the exact same language. By the end of the week, that number skyrocketed to 19. The UFC knew then that something far larger than personal grievances was unfolding beneath their noses, a truly coordinated communication chain.
Out there, there's a discussion that does Darren Till, with a win over Brunson, qualify to go right into a fight with Adesanya. And the only reason that I thought Whitaker was fighting him, that's the part that I've missed.
The identity of the primary architect behind this unprecedented movement remained a mystery, sparking widespread speculation throughout the MMA community. One hypothesis suggested a top contender orchestrated the plan, maintaining plausible deniability through layers of intermediaries. Another theory pointed to a powerful manager acting as a de facto union representative, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. A third possibility circulated among gyms, that the idea originated from several mid-level fighters who realized their collective influence far outweighed their public rankings. According to internal chatter, the truth was even more unexpected. The spark had not come from a title challenger or a headline caliber name, but from a pair of fighters ranked outside the top 10. They noticed they were effectively receiving the same pay structure, despite drastically different workloads and event pressures. Their conclusion was simple: if the pay scale didn't reflect the competitive hierarchy, then the entire hierarchy was unstable. This startling realization was the real catalyst.
Words were still spoken that they're still giving a look at Till, and there's still nothing concrete about Adesanya.
Amidst the growing chaos, a critical thematic anchor emerged: the disorganization and uncertainty at middleweight, as articulated by the legendary Chael Sonnen. While discussing matchmaking confusion, Sonnen asked a question that would later appear across social media once the announcement leaked. "Guys, what's going on at middleweight? I have to know everything. I have to know everybody else's business, right?" Although Sonnen was referring specifically to scheduling woes, his framing inadvertently described the broader, seismic situation now unfolding. The division's internal dynamics had moved into a phase where every athlete, manager, coach, and promoter desperately sought to know what the others were doing. Information became the most valuable commodity, rarer than gold. Sonnen's casual commentary, once just amusing, became a prophetic descriptor of the sweeping confusion and deliberate opacity that now consumed the entire division. It underscored how deeply unsettling the situation truly was for everyone involved. The tipping point for coordinated action wasn't a grand declaration, but a tangible, undeniable piece of evidence. A mid-ranked fighter, whose name was deliberately omitted from public communication to prevent retaliation, shared internal financial documentation. This document revealed that a non-UFC regional promotion had offered him a multi-fight deal, exceeding his most recent UFC purse by a substantial margin. This wasn't rhetoric. This was quantifiable proof. This document circulated rapidly, transforming the idea of middleweights getting their money elsewhere from a mere threat into a concrete marketplace possibility. Fighters at multiple ranking tiers reviewed the offer, realizing that even if they weren't personally receiving identical terms, the mere existence of such a deal demonstrated immense marketplace leverage. Financial alternatives were no longer theoretical, they were real, they were accessible, and they completely reshaped the fighters' collective mindset, fueling their resolve to push for structural change. At roughly the same time, top 10 fighters faced increasing logistical delays regarding opponent assignments. Several matchups expected internally but never publicly confirmed remained inexplicably stalled. Challengers found it difficult to receive definitive timelines for their next bouts. Fighters ranked between 6 and 10 saw potential opponents repeatedly reshuffled, creating immense frustration. Even before the mass withdrawal, scheduling stagnation had become consistent enough to generate palpable anger. Chael Sonnen, commenting on these delays, unintentionally summarized the fighters' private discussions. "No fight gets announced, nothing gets signed, and I felt as though this just got brought to the end." While Sonnen interpreted it through a matchmaking lens, fighters saw it as a clear sign they could leverage this instability to negotiate for better terms. They perceived other divisions, like lightweight and bantamweight, as receiving more rapid promotional prioritization, adding to their grievances. A core internal motivator for the middleweights was the perception that their division consistently generated consistent highlight finishes, stable top contenders, and recognizable personalities, yet their financial escalators had not matched that undeniable value. This wasn't about headliner-level superstar pay, it was about the structural middle class of the roster. Many fighters ranked between 11 and 20 believed they were producing commercially valuable performances while receiving compensation disproportionate to the risk profile of their matchups. Their collective argument centered on a specific economic principle: if a division consistently delivers high click-through rates on promotional material, strong social media crossover engagement, and frequent fight-of-the-night caliber action, then its pay scale should operate on a higher baseline. They claimed their metrics exceeded those of certain divisions whose athletes publicly disclosed much larger purses. Whether perfectly accurate or not, this perception itself powerfully fueled the movement, giving it a quantifiable basis. When the official announcement finally leaked, it contained 12 paragraphs, each meticulously crafted with legalistic neutrality. The message deliberately avoided inflammatory words, opting instead for contractual terminology, evaluation, reassessment, structural realignment, comparative compensation models. It was designed to appear administrative, not accusatory. However, the final paragraph contained the only sentence written in plainly emotional language: "We will get our money elsewhere." Analysts immediately speculated that this line had been added by a veteran fighter who wanted the message to carry weight beyond procedural bureaucracy, to deliver a potent emotional punch. Some fighters later informally claimed it was a deliberate test of public reaction, gauging the appetite for such a radical move. Others argued it was an unplanned, raw insertion that unexpectedly became the announcement's defining, most iconic feature. Regardless of its origin, that single phrase became the rallying cry, echoing across the globe. The UFC's immediate internal assessment categorized the situation as an organized but ultimately temporary disruption. Their predictive modeling indicated that most fighters would eventually resume negotiations once short-term leverage diminished. Historically, fighters acting independently had limited ability to sustain coordinated pressure, often breaking ranks for individual gain. But this situation was starkly different. For the first time, the division's entire top 10 was participating at the same rate as those ranked below them. Unlike previous disruptions involving smaller groups, this movement encompassed the entire competitive pipeline, from champion contenders to developmental prospects. The middleweight title picture entered immediate uncertainty. The reigning champion found himself without a confirmed opponent. Contenders 1 through 4 declined all negotiations. Fighters ranked 5 through 8 refused matchups unless attached to revised financial guarantees. This unity, spanning all ranks, was the critical factor the UFC's models failed to predict. The movement's audacious coordination strategy relied on 3 strict yet unwritten rules. First, no fighter was allowed to accept a fight until the group collectively approved a new financial structure. This prevented individual defections from undermining the collective leverage. Second, managers were strictly prohibited from independently negotiating side agreements outside the unified stance, ensuring a single strong front. The group also agreed that no fighter would publicly disclose internal disagreements, ensuring the UFC could not exploit fractures within the coalition. These rules were enforced socially rather than contractually, a powerful pact of honor. Adherence remained unexpectedly strong because fighters viewed non-compliance as a direct threat to their own long-term earning potential. Breaking ranks meant not only immediate personal gain, but potential blacklisting within a powerful, unified peer group. The social pressure was immense, proving more binding than any formal contract. The initial shockwave across the MMA community generated widespread speculation. Analysts debated whether the UFC would temporarily bypass the entire division by scheduling catchweight fights or elevating fighters from adjacent weight classes. Some identified potential stand-ins from welterweight and light heavyweight for marquee events, offering a brief reprieve for event scheduling. However, these solutions lacked any long-term viability. The UFC fundamentally required a functioning middleweight ecosystem to maintain rankings, ensure contender development, and uphold its pay-per-view scheduling architecture. A temporary workaround, while perhaps delaying immediate pain, would not address the deep-seated structural issue that had triggered this unprecedented walkout. The organization faced a stark reality. Without its middleweight division, the intricate competitive balance and promotional narratives of the UFC would crumble, leaving a gaping, irreparable hole in its roster and event calendar. The middleweights had created an existential threat. Then the second phase of the plan began, a move the UFC never anticipated. This phase wasn't reactive, it had been meticulously planned long before the initial announcement leaked. The middleweight division had prepared a layered structural blueprint, outlining precisely how fighters would maintain financial stability, public visibility, and internal unity, while steadfastly refusing UFC negotiations. This blueprint ensured that the withdrawal could extend indefinitely without collapsing under the usual pressures: inactivity, missed paychecks, promotional displacement, or loss of momentum. It was a comprehensive strategy to outsmart the UFC at their own game, designed to eliminate every traditional point of leverage the promotion held over its athlete. This wasn't just a walkout, it was a sustained, sophisticated campaign to reshape the very foundations of fighter economics, a testament to the unparalleled foresight and unity within the division. The first safeguard involved diversified income streams. Fighters at different ranking tiers had discreetly secured individual agreements with sponsors, gym partnerships, seminar circuits, instructional platforms, and international exhibition promoters. These agreements were intentionally staggered in activation timelines, meaning fighters wouldn't all scramble for financial alternatives simultaneously. Instead, each athlete had 2 or 3 supplemental income sources scheduled to activate sequentially, ensuring consistent revenue without needing a single UFC purse. Many opportunities required no physical competition, removing the UFC's traditional leverage point: financial pressure caused by inactivity. The second safeguard addressed public visibility. To counteract fading from public attention without UFC media cycles, the division collectively organized a media rotation plan. Fighters coordinated joint appearances, cross-promotional interviews, training session live streams, and roundtable discussions, ensuring multiple athletes remained visible every week, regardless of their individual ranking or star power. The third safeguard addressed performance readiness. Fighters agreed to maintain active training schedules, rotating through shared training camps that focused on skill refinement rather than fight-specific preparation. These camps allowed sparring partners to cycle between different gym environments without violating existing contracts. By maintaining peak conditioning and technical sharpness, fighters prevented the UFC from claiming the division had become inactive or unprepared, making the withdrawal more potent because they could re-enter competition immediately once demands were met. The fourth safeguard mitigated internal collapse. Historically, unified fighter movements failed when individual athletes broke ranks for immediate benefits. The middleweights anticipated this vulnerability. To counter it, they built a mutual guarantee system. If any fighter lost external income opportunities due to participation in the movement, others would redirect a portion of their sponsorship revenue to fill the gap. This dramatically reduced the incentive for defecting, solidifying their ranks against the UFC's pressure. The fifth and final safeguard addressed public narrative. The fighters agreed not to frame the withdrawal as a protest, strike, or grievance. Instead, they strategically framed it as an evaluation period. This phrasing mirrored contractual language and prevented the UFC from framing the situation as insubordination. By maintaining neutral terminology, the fighters prevented the narrative from appearing adversarial, making it harder for promotional rhetoric to turn public opinion against them. With these safeguards meticulously in place, the division moved into the second phase, parallel advancement. In this phase, fighters continued to operate as though the UFC did not exist. They accepted invitations to grappling tournaments, striking showcases, open workouts, and charity exhibitions. These were not fights, so they did not violate any contractual exclusivity clauses, yet they boosted visibility and maintained public engagement without offering the UFC any promotional control. This strategy was ingenious, draining the UFC of its power. The UFC then attempted a more aggressive approach. They offered several fighters substantially increased purses for short-notice fights, demonstrating a willingness to negotiate. However, because these offers were individual rather than structural, fighters uniformly declined. Accepting them would have undermined the entire movement by introducing preferential treatment and fracturing their unity. Fighters recognized that systemic change would only occur if they maintained collective pressure, not if they accepted isolated benefits. The UFC's negotiating position depended on contract extensions and mandatory fight clauses, but with no new bouts accepted, these became difficult to enforce. They considered replacing the entire division with new signings, but this was impractical. New athletes lacked name value for pay-per-views, and fans wouldn't accept the title lineage built exclusively from replacement fighters. The UFC was trapped, unable to divide, coerce, or replace their defiant roster. Phase 3, labeled Irreversible Leverage Acquisition and Confidential Planning Documents, was designed to permanently shift the balance of power. It began with the creation of a centralized data coalition. Fighters pulled their performance metrics, brand analytics, sponsorship valuations, social media and engagement statistics, and independent market projections into a shared repository. This quantified the division's collective commercial value with startling precision. For the first time, fighters possessed a unified, statistically supported valuation of their worth, independent of UFC framing. This data revealed the middleweight division held the third highest combined global engagement across all UFC weight classes, with engagement growing during the withdrawal. This non-expected growth proved their relevance didn't depend solely on UFC events, justifying the next escalation, an anonymous independent negotiating council. This council then initiated cross-organizational negotiation, securing conditional interest agreements from multiple international promotions, creating a powerful catalog of alternatives. The turning point in Phase 3 occurred with the launch of the parallel competitive exhibition circuit. This wasn't a rival organization or league, it was a series of scheduled exhibitions, grappling matches, striking showcases, open skills demonstrations, designed to simulate the competitive hierarchy without violating UFC exclusivity clauses. The circuit featured rankings, matchups, rule sets, judges, and digital broadcasts, replicating the competitive tension of MMA in a non-MMA environment. Fans gravitated toward it immediately, and viewership skyrocketed. Fighters maintained visibility, rivalries intensified, and matchups impossible in the UFC happened under alternative formats. The circuit generated its own storylines, statistics, and momentum, paralleling the official UFC narrative without replacing it. The UFC watched as their middleweight roster became more popular while functioning independently, their control over narrative legitimacy rapidly eroding, as fans began asking if these exhibitions reflected real rankings, and some analysts declared the circuit more competitive. The crisis then escalated into unprecedented territory: inter-division solidarity. Fighters from lightweight, welterweight, and bantamweight divisions privately contacted the middleweights, requesting guidance on forming similar collective structures. The enormous implications of this were clear. The middleweights refrained from publicly supporting cross-division coordination, but they did privately share their organizational blueprints. The UFC sensed this terrifying shift. For the first time, the crisis threatened to expand beyond a single weight class, potentially crippling multiple divisions. Public pressure intensified dramatically, with fans demanding transparency, analysts demanding answers, and media outlets framing the withdrawal as a historic transformation of MMA economics. The UFC's strategic silence no longer maintained control. They risked allowing the narrative to evolve without them, facing an existential threat. As a direct result, executive leadership initiated direct negotiations with the Middleweight Council, a groundbreaking development and a tacit acknowledgement of structural bargaining power. Even amidst secret negotiations, the middleweights delivered a final breathtaking escalation. 2 months into the talks, they scheduled a peak exhibition event, a simulated middleweight Grand Prix. This event featured 8 fighters, seeded based on their exhibition performance metrics. Although not an MMA competition, the Grand Prix incorporated elements of grappling, striking, cage movement drills, endurance tests, and competitive scrambles. Fans immediately perceived it as a symbolic championship. Tickets sold out instantly, and streaming platforms experienced record traffic. Commentary teams openly compared Grand Prix winners to hypothetical UFC title contenders, creating an intense, unofficial championship narrative. The UFC recognized the existential threat instantly. Fans embraced an unofficial championship narrative. The UFC's own belts risked losing their cultural authority and competitive legitimacy. This simulated championship, despite producing no actual champion, validated the idea that competitive legitimacy could be built entirely outside UFC events, a true game changer. The middleweight division's calculated, unified stand forced the UFC to bend, ultimately leading to negotiations that reshaped fighter-promoter dynamics forever. This wasn't just about better pay for one division, it was about establishing a powerful precedent that collective action, meticulously planned and brilliantly executed, could challenge even the most dominant forces in combat sports. The fighters didn't just walk out, they built a parallel universe, proving their value and relevance extended far beyond a single promotional banner. Their strategy fundamentally altered the power balance, demonstrating that athletes, when truly united and strategically prepared, possess an irreversible leverage capable of transforming their sport from the ground up. This monumental moment wasn't merely a temporary disruption, it was a permanent shift, an economic revolution initiated by those who dared to ask for their worth, and then, crucially, built the means to get it elsewhere or otherwise.